My name is Elizabeth, and the night my marriage died, it wasn't whispered in secrets or hidden behind locked doors. It was spoken directly to my face, in a voice smooth with arrogance, with a smile so sharp it carved into me. Richard sat across from me at our dining room table, his glass of wine tilted lazily in his hand. His tie was loosened, his hair perfectly in place, his posture that of a man who believed the world bent around him. And then, with no hesitation, no flicker of guilt, he looked me in the eye and said the words that shattered everything. I slept with my secretary, and I don't regret it. The air in the room thickened, pressing against me until it was hard to breathe. I remember the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The candle between us burned low, its flame wavering as if in sympathy. The food on my plate turned to ash in my mouth. And through it all, Richard's expression never faltered, calm, proud, almost daring me to react. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass, savoring his own cruelty. "You should have known," he said, his tone laced with mockery. "A man like me doesn't settle for just one. And you?" His eyes traveled over me, cold, dispassionate. "You've become dull. Predictable. She excites me in ways you never could." The words pierced deeper than any blade. For years I had been his partner. I stood beside him when his career demanded late nights, when the bills piled up, when he doubted himself. I hosted his colleagues in our home. I made sacrifices to keep his ambition alive. Every excuse for his absences, every explanation for his fatigue, I had believed them. I had believed in him. But now the truth sat across from me in tailored arrogance. The late nights were not for ambition. The perfume I sometimes smelled on his suits did not come from a crowded elevator. The distracted smiles, the excuses, all of them were for her. And worse than the betrayal itself was the arrogance of it. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't ashamed. He wanted me to know. I sat frozen, my fork trembling in my hand, my mind screaming but my voice caught. Richard smirked, sipping his wine as if to punctuate his victory. "You'll get over it, Elizabeth. Wives always do." In that moment something inside me broke, but not in the way he expected. I pushed back my chair quietly, the scrape of wood against the floor cutting through the silence. My face betrayed nothing. "I'll clean this up later," I murmured, rising from the table. My voice was steady, calm. I walked down the hall to the bedroom, closing the door behind me. The weight of his words pressed against my chest, but I refused to collapse. I stood before the mirror, my reflection trembling. Eyes wide, lips pressed tight, a face caught between grief and fury. Tears burned at the edges of my eyes, but beneath them, deeper, steadier, something else stirred. A seed of resolve. Richard thought I was weak. He thought humiliation would keep me silent, that betrayal would leave me broken. But he had just handed me a weapon. The truth. I whispered to my reflection, each word a vow. "You will regret it, Richard. I'll make sure you do." Because what began with his smug confession would not end in silence. It would end in a reckoning so sharp, so public, that the man who believed himself untouchable would choke on the very pride he flaunted. The morning after Richard's confession, sunlight spilled across our kitchen as if nothing had changed. But everything had. He whistled softly while buttering toast, humming to himself with the smug calm of a man who had dropped a bomb and walked away from the wreckage. He kissed my cheek before leaving for the office, his lips brushing against my skin as though his words from last night had evaporated with the wine. But they hadn't. They echoed in my skull like a drumbeat. I slept with my secretary, and I don't regret it. When the door closed behind him, the silence in the house was unbearable. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the crumbs left on his plate, my hands trembling around a coffee cup. For years I had built my life around this man. The late nights, the business trips, the canceled dinners, I had told myself they were sacrifices we both made for his career. I had silenced the nagging doubts, convinced myself I was imagining things whenever I noticed perfume on his collar or lipstick faintly smeared on a receipt. Now I knew I hadn't imagined anything. He had been feeding his pride with betrayal, while I had been feeding his ambition with loyalty. That day I couldn't bring myself to work. I paced the house, anger and grief crashing inside me like colliding waves. But by afternoon, the anger began to win. I returned to the dining room and replayed his expression in my mind, The arrogance, the smirk, the way he said wives always do. He wasn't worried about losing me. He wasn't even worried about consequences. He believed he was untouchable. That was the moment I realized. His confession wasn't just betrayal. It was a challenge. That evening, when Richard returned home, he carried himself with the swagger of a man who believed he had control. He kissed me again, poured himself a drink and said, "Board meeting went late. She and I." He paused deliberately, watching for my reaction, savoring the sting. I kept my face still, my voice calm. "Dinner's in the oven." He laughed softly. "That's my Elizabeth. Unshakable." Inside, my hands clenched so tightly my nails bit into my palms. But I gave him nothing. When he went upstairs to shower, I slipped into his study. His briefcase was unlatched, a stack of papers inside. Expense reports, receipts, credit card slips. Mundane on the surface, but my eyes caught details. 2 dinners at upscale restaurants I had never visited. Hotel stays in the city when he had claimed to be away on business trips. Jewelry purchases never gifted to me. Proof. My pulse hammered as I slid the papers back, careful not to disturb their order. I felt the seed of resolve from the night before take root. This wasn't grief anymore. It was strategy. I had been blind long enough. Now I would watch. That night, as he slept beside me, I lay awake in the dark. Every faint snore, every turn of his body felt like a reminder of the lie he lived. I stared at the ceiling, whispering to myself, "Don't react. Record. Don't scream. Collect." The next morning, I began my silent investigation. When Richard showered, I checked the pockets of his jacket. A folded note from a hotel valet. When he left for the office, I photographed the receipts on his desk. When he logged into his laptop, I watched his fingers carefully, memorizing the passwords he assumed I'd never notice. Each discovery was a pinprick of pain, but also a spark of power. And yet something else haunted me. His pride. The way he had wanted me to know. It meant he wasn't hiding anymore, not from me. He thought my silence was guaranteed, that I would endure humiliation like a dutiful wife. But silence was not surrender. It was patience. I wasn't sure how yet, but I would turn his arrogance against him. I would make his own words, "I don't regret it," the very rope that would hang his pride in front of everyone he hoped to impress. Because the more I searched, the more I realized his betrayal wasn't a single affair. It was a pattern. And the deeper I looked, the more I uncovered proof that would one day destroy him, if I had the courage to use it. Once I knew the truth, I could no longer pretend. Richard thought my silence meant surrender, but it became my camouflage. Every nod, every polite smile, every meal I set on the table was part of a mask. Behind it, I began constructing a different reality, one built on facts sharp enough to cut through his arrogance. The first step was paper. Every morning I combed through the small things he left behind. Receipts, valet slips, credit card charges left casually on the counter. I photographed everything, storing copies on a hidden drive under a false name. I created a binder marked innocuously as recipes, and slipped printed documents inside. It became my secret archive, page by page, turning his arrogance into evidence. The second step was observation. Richard was careless. He believed he had broken me. When he stayed late, I called the office line and let it ring until his secretary answered. Her voice always trembled slightly, confirming what I already knew. When he said he was meeting clients, I traced the location tags on his social media posts, cross-checking them with charges on his card. And when he kissed my cheek at night, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine, I smiled and filed the detail away. I learned his patterns. The hotels he favored. The restaurants he returned to again and again. The jewelry store where he bought gifts that never reached my hands. Each discovery hurt, but each one also hardened me. I was no longer just a wife betrayed. I was a woman documenting, recording, sharpening my resolve. By the second week, my binder was thick with proof. Dinners for 2 at rooftop restaurants. Overnight stays billed to the company but tied to weekends. A necklace purchased with the note for her name. His secretary. One evening after Richard left for a meeting, I sat at my desk, staring at the folder. My hands shook as I flipped through pages, the sheer weight of betrayal pressing down on me. But then I remembered his smirk, his voice dripping with contempt. "You'll get over it, Elizabeth. Wives always do." I whispered back to the empty room. Not this wife. But collecting receipts was not enough. I needed to secure myself legally. If Richard wanted to discard me one day, he would try to strip me of everything. Our home, my inheritance, the years of sacrifices I had made. He had to be cornered, not just confronted. So I began researching. Divorce lawyers. Financial investigators. Stories of other women who had stood where I stood. I read late into the night, learning how betrayal could be turned into leverage if timed correctly. Meanwhile, Richard became bolder. He stopped pretending altogether. He brought his secretary's perfume home with him. He let her name slip once in conversation, pausing only to see if I'd react. I didn't. That was my power. He mistook my silence for blindness. In reality, it gave me space to keep gathering, keep building. But something else gnawed at me. In his office bag one evening, I found not just receipts from hotels, but documents suggesting misuse of company funds. Payments filed under vague descriptions, money flowing to cover his outings. This was no longer only about broken vows. It was about fraud. And fraud meant leverage stronger than any confrontation in the bedroom. The binder grew heavier. My patience grew colder. Still, I knew I couldn't fight this alone. Richard had money, lawyers, and the arrogance of a man who believed the law bent for him. I needed allies. People who would see the truth and stand beside me. Because as I flipped through the binder one last time that night, I realized I was ready for the next step. I would stop grieving in silence and start gathering allies. And once the right people stood with me, Richard's empire of lies would begin to crack. The binder sat heavy on my desk, bursting with receipts, screenshots, and documents that painted the truth in unforgiving ink. But as much as I wanted to believe it was enough, deep down I knew one thing. I could not do this alone. Richard had money, lawyers, and an ego that thrived on control. He would twist my words, call me bitter, claim I was imagining things. If I stepped into battle with only emotion, he would destroy me. I needed people who could stand beside me, people who would see the evidence for what it was and help me transform it into a weapon. The first person I turned to was Julia, my oldest friend. She had known me before Richard. Back when we were college roommates sharing late-night coffee and dreams. I invited her to my house one evening, the binder hidden beneath a stack of cookbooks on the counter. When she arrived, I couldn't keep the mask on anymore. I led her to the study, pulled out the binder, and laid it open across the desk. "Read," I whispered. Her eyes moved over the pages. Receipts, hotel invoices, jewelry purchases, screenshots of text messages I had copied down from his laptop. As she turned each page, her face shifted from confusion to anger, and then to something sharper, determination. Finally, she looked at me. "Elizabeth, he doesn't deserve another second of your silence." The tears I had been holding back slipped free, but they weren't only grief anymore. They were relief. Julia's certainty steadied me in a way nothing else had. But friendship alone couldn't corner Richard. I needed legal power. Julia gave me the name of an attorney she trusted. Evelyn Ross. "She's not flashy like Richard's lawyers," Julia explained. "But she's brilliant. She doesn't just win cases. She dismantles men who think they're untouchable." I scheduled a consultation the next day. Evelyn's office was modest, a far cry from the gleaming tower Richard worked in. She welcomed me with a steady handshake and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I laid the binder on her desk, my hands trembling as I spoke. He confessed to cheating. With his secretary. He told me he didn't regret it. And then I found this. She leafed through the documents carefully, her brow furrowing. When she finally looked up, her voice was calm, precise. "You've done more work than most private investigators. What you have here isn't just grounds for divorce. It's grounds for leverage. He's not only betrayed you, he may have committed financial misconduct. That gives you power." The word power sent a chill down my spine. For months I had felt powerless. Now, for the first time, I felt a spark of control. Evelyn leaned forward. "But timing is everything. If you confront him now, he'll bury evidence, spin the narrative, and make you look unstable. If you wait, collect more, prepare, we can strike in a way he won't recover from. Are you willing to be patient?" I thought of Richard's smirk, his mocking words. Wives always do. My jaw tightened. I'm willing. That evening I met Elise, his secretary. The woman he had so carelessly admitted to sleeping with. I expected disdain, even hostility. But when we sat across from each other at a quiet cafe, I saw fear in her eyes. He's reckless, she whispered. He made me cover for him at work, file false expenses, lie to clients. I didn't know how to tell you. I studied her carefully, torn between anger and strange pity. Why now? Her hand shook as she gripped her coffee. Because if he falls, I don't want to be dragged down with him. And because... Her eyes met mine, glassy with guilt. You deserve to know the truth. She slid a folder across the table. Expense report signed by Richard. Doctored invoices. Proof of funds diverted. My hands trembled as I opened it. This was more than adultery. This was fraud, plain and simple. With Julia's loyalty, Evelyn's strategy, and Elise's reluctant honesty, I finally had the beginnings of an army. I wasn't standing alone anymore. At home, Richard still moved through the halls with arrogant ease, humming as he loosened his tie, sipping wine as if his world was secure. He didn't notice the way I watched him, the calm smile that now masked a storm. Because while he believed my silence meant defeat, I was already building the counterplan that would turn his confession into the noose he never saw tightening. We met in Evelyn's office and called it a war room. The blinds were half drawn. The city lay like a metal river outside the glass. My binders sat on her desk. They looked ordinary. Inside them they were not. Evelyn spread the evidence across the desk. Receipts, hotel invoices, email printouts, bank transfers, pages with Richard's signature, pages with dates that did not match his stories. Each one stung. Each one was proof. She tapped a line with her pen and did not look up. You did the hard part, she said. Now we make it sing. We worked the outline like surgeons. The plan had 3 parts: legal, financial, public. Each part had to fit the others. Each part had to be flawless. There would be no mercy. There would be no surprises. First, legal. Evelyn would file a civil complaint for fraud and dissipation of marital assets. She would request temporary relief. She would ask the court to freeze accounts. She would subpoena documents. That would stop him from moving money. It would also give us a record. Documentation. Court papers are forceful. Judges read facts. Facts cut arrogance. Second, financial. We would hire a forensic accountant. Julia found one the same afternoon. He was quiet and precise. He smelled faintly of coffee and math. He would trace transfers. He would map the shell companies. He would create a report a judge could not ignore. That report would convert receipts into a narrative. Money becomes a language. We would speak it clearly. Third, public. We would not shout. We would not become spectacle. We would time exposure. Richard loved light. He loved praise. He loved stages. We would use that against him. Evelyn suggested filing the core documents on the morning of his planned charity gala. By evening, the room where he planned to shine would be the room where his truth spread on every phone. Cameras would carry the court papers into living rooms. His applause would become silence. His friends would not be able to pretend they did not read the facts. We rehearsed each step. Evelyn dictated the motion language. Include the transfers to accounts under aliases, she said. Include the invoices he billed to his expense reports. Tie the hotel stays to dates he told you he was working. Tie his signature to the authorization forms. Julia annotated the timeline. If we show a pattern across months, she said, the judge sees intent. I printed copies and filed them into envelopes. I labeled them. I numbered them. I memorized the sequence. Security was next. Evidence must not vanish. David, the forensic accountant, recommended encryption. He set up a secure drive. He made 2 backups. One went into a safety deposit box. One went to Evelyn's encrypted server. Chain of custody mattered. If Richard or his team questioned authenticity, we would show how we secured it. We would show the path from folder to court. We also prepared for attack. Richard would hire a bulldog of a lawyer. He would try to humiliate me. He would try to pin lies on me. He would spin a story of a bitter wife. So Evelyn prepared a narrative of integrity. We drafted a short, calm statement I could give if asked. Said, I loved once. I see the truth now. I want facts. I seek fairness. Nothing dramatic. No melodrama. The law would do the rest. Elisa's role was delicate. She had handed me proofs. She also still worked in Richard's orbit. She agreed to a secure meeting to transfer documents she had kept. She agreed to testify if asked. She trembled when she said it. I am done hiding, she whispered. I will tell the truth. The calendar tightened. The gala was scheduled in 2 weeks. It was his celebration meant to show his competence and charm. He would walk into a room full of admirers and step into our net. Evelyn prepared to file the complaint early on the morning of the gala. By afternoon the press would have copies. By evening, his stage would be decreed a trap. We ran through the worst cases as Evelyn insisted we must. What if Richard moved funds overnight? Then we would get temporary relief. What if he deleted emails? Then we had prints and backups with timestamps. What if he discredited Elise? Then we had her witness statements recorded and notarized. Every vulnerability he had, we met with a procedure. We closed doors. We sealed windows. My life became rehearsal. I practiced calm in the mirror. I practiced not flinching when he brushed my shoulder. I practiced smiling as if nothing burned inside. That was important. Richard wanted reaction. He wanted spectacle. He wanted me to ruin myself. So I trained my face to be a shield. At night, I returned to the binders and read the numbers until the pages blurred. Each line stung. Each line became a map. I memorized names. I traced accounts. I imagined the faces of people who would read the filings and understand. They would not forgive him. They would not forget. 1 week before the gala, the world changed. A name appeared in the financial records I had missed. A transfer from a partner I had never suspected. It suggested associates, not only lovers. The implication was wider. The risk was higher. Evelyn did not hide her concern. This widens the circle, she said slowly. If this involves partners who profit, then exposure may set off reactions we cannot predict. They have stakes. My throat went dry. Stakes meant danger. Stakes meant enemies who would not fall quietly. Yet we did not retreat. We tightened the plan. We added a contingency. We arranged for copies of the forensic report to be delivered simultaneously to reputable news outlets. We notified a trusted reporter under condition of a delayed embargo. We mapped the press cycle. If the gala shifted the story, the press would turn attention toward the documents, not me. And still, as we set the final timelines, the world felt smaller and meaner. I had traded my private grief for method. I had turned betrayal into a timetable. I had made the house we once shared a stage for his undoing. On the morning we planned to file, my phone rang. The number was unknown. A voice said 3 words and hung up. Elise is gone. The morning of the gala arrived gray and heavy, as though the sky itself knew what was about to break. I woke before dawn, my body rigid with anticipation. Richard still slept soundly beside me, his mouth half open, his breath steady. He had no idea that the ground beneath him was hours from giving way. I slipped quietly from bed and poured coffee into a thermos. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Evelyn. Today is the day, she said, her voice steady. Our filing went through at 7. The documents are time-stamped, the complaint acknowledged. By noon, reporters will begin asking questions. Relief coursed through me, quick and electric. The trap had been set. All I had to do now was walk into that ballroom tonight and let him bask in light that would soon sear him. But then another call came. An unknown number. I answered, my heart tight. A man's voice, low and hurried. Elise is gone. The line went dead. For a moment I stood frozen, the thermos slipping from my grip, hot coffee spilling across the counter. Gone. My mind whirled. I dialed her number immediately. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. Within the hour, Julia arrived at my door. I showed her the missed calls, my hands trembling. She's the one who gave me the expense reports. She's the one who could testify. If she disappears, if she's silenced. Julia grabbed my shoulders, steadying me. We still have evidence. We still have Evelyn. Don't panic. But panic had already settled in my chest. Elise wasn't just a source of proof. She was the crack in Richard's facade. Without her voice, he could argue the reports were forged, fabricated by a bitter wife. Judges cared about paper, yes, but they cared more about witnesses. I called Evelyn. She listened in silence before speaking, her tone cool but urgent. If Elise is missing, we cannot wait for her to return. We must assume Richard knows. He may have pressured her. He may have frightened her. The filings still stand, but the defense will be more aggressive. Be ready. Her calm steadied me, but only slightly. Because if Richard had reached Elise, what else might he do? What lengths would he go to in order to protect himself? The day dragged. Every hour felt doubled. News alerts began flashing across phones. Rumors of financial irregularities tied to Richard's company. A few blogs mentioned the complaint, but the mainstream outlets had not yet moved. Timing was still in our favor. At 6, I dressed for the gala. A simple gown of deep navy, nothing flashy. I pinned my hair in place with trembling hands. Julia zipped the back of my dress and whispered, "He thinks you're walking into his celebration. He has no idea you're walking into his funeral." Her words should have calmed me. Instead, I thought of Elise. Where was she? Was she safe? Would her silence unravel the edge we had sharpened? We arrived at the ballroom under a storm of camera flashes. The hotel glittered with chandeliers, guests in gowns and tuxedos flowing through glass doors. Laughter filled the air, the polished sound of wealth. Richard stood at the center of it all, tall, composed, radiant with arrogance. He welcomed guests with his practiced smile, his secretary nowhere in sight. He looked untouchable. But I knew. His empire was already burning from within. Inside, champagne glasses clinked. Waiters glided through the room. Music hummed like background silk. Richard took the stage near a grand piano, lifting a glass of golden wine. "Tonight," he announced, "we celebrate not only our company's growth, but our future together. We celebrate truth, partnership, and ambition." Applause thundered. The chandelier light gleamed off polished shoes and sequined gowns. But even as he spoke, my phone buzzed inside my clutch. I slipped it out, shielding the screen with my hand. Another message, anonymous, the words sharp as a blade. "Elise will not save you. Tonight you will stand alone." My chest tightened, the air in the ballroom suddenly too thick. I forced my face into stillness, but inside I knew, the pivot had come. The plan was not as stable as I thought. Elise was gone. And someone out there wanted me broken just as badly as I wanted Richard ruined. I slipped the phone back into my clutch, my pulse hammering. The gala continued around me, the music swelling. Richard grinning from the stage. He had no idea the clock was ticking on him. But I knew the truth. The clock was ticking on me too. Because in that glittering room, beneath the chandeliers and applause, I realized this battle was no longer just about Richard. It was about survival. And before the night ended, someone would lose everything. The chandeliers in the ballroom gleamed like frozen stars. Laughter rang out, champagne fizzed, and Richard basked in the glow of attention as if the night had been crafted solely to crown him king. He stood on the stage near the piano, his suit gleaming, his voice smooth and rich. I stood at the edge of the room, Julia at my side, Evelyn a few feet away, her phone in hand. The weight of my clutch pressed against me. Inside it, the phone that had carried the threats, the proof, and now the signal that tonight would not unfold as expected. Richard lifted his glass. "This evening," he proclaimed, "is a testament to hard work, to vision, to those who believed in me when others doubted. We are not only building a company, we are building a future." Applause thundered. The room swelled with admiration. Faces glowed, eager to be associated with his light. But then Evelyn's phone buzzed. She glanced down, her lips tightening, and gave me the faintest nod. The filings had gone live. Court documents, evidence, receipts. All released to the press at once. Journalists in the crowd already had the links. The ripple began almost immediately. First a whisper. Then the flicker of screens as guests lowered their eyes to phones. Murmurs spread. A woman near the front gasped. A man frowned, scrolling furiously. Another whispered to his partner, their faces pale under the golden light. Richard continued, oblivious at first. "Tonight we celebrate honesty, transparency, and..." A voice rang out, sharp and clear. "Mr. Moreau, How do you explain the shell companies listed in today's filing? The room went still. Every eye turned toward the journalist holding up his phone. Cameras flashed. Richard froze, his glass suspended midair. Excuse me. Another voice shouted. The complaint filed this morning. It details fraudulent transfers, misuse of company funds, and multiple hotel stays billed to business accounts. Care to comment? The silence cracked like glass. The crowd erupted into chaos. Questions hurled from every side, reporters pushing forward, flashes blinding. Richard's mask faltered. His smirk twitched. Sweat gathered at his temple. These are lies, he barked. Fabrications. Do you think I would? But Evelyn's voice cut through the uproar, steady and precise. They are not fabrications. They are facts. Receipts signed in your hand. Transfers traced by accountants. Hotel invoices matching the dates you swore you were abroad. The truth is in every document. Gasps rippled through the room. Investors stared stunned. Donors whispered fiercely. Phones lit up as headlines spread in real time. Richard's eyes found me across the crowd. His face contorted with fury. Elizabeth, he shouted, his voice echoing beneath the chandeliers. This is your doing. I didn't move. I didn't speak. My silence was louder than any denial. The woman beside him, a board member's wife, stepped back sharply, disgust in her eyes. You humiliated her, she hissed, loud enough for others to hear. And you humiliated us all. The applause was gone now, replaced by a storm of condemnation. His empire was crumbling, not slowly but all at once, in front of the very people he craved admiration from. He dropped his glass, the champagne splattering across polished marble. She is lying, he screamed. All of you, this is her revenge. But the crowd wasn't listening. They had seen enough. Screens glowed with the truth. His name was already poison. Julia leaned closer, her whisper hot against my ear. He's finished. For a moment I believed her. But then my phone vibrated in my clutch again. Another anonymous message glared up at me. You wanted him destroyed. You got your wish. But you are not untouchable, Elizabeth. Your turn is coming. A chill cut through me. Around me, Richard drowned in disgrace, the crowd tearing away what was left of his pride. But the message reminded me, I was not safe. Because while Richard's ruin played out under chandeliers and cameras, I realized the story wasn't ending. It was only shifting. And the next target in the spotlight might be me. The ballroom collapsed into chaos. Reporters surged forward, their voices colliding, their cameras flashing. Guests who had raised glasses minutes before now backed away, their faces twisted in shock and disgust. Some whispered urgently to each other, already planning their exits. Others stared at Richard as though they had never seen him before. Richard stood frozen under the chandeliers, sweat slicking his forehead. His suit stained with spilled champagne. He reached for the microphone again, but the crowd no longer belonged to him. The questions flew too fast, too sharp. Did you falsify expense reports, Mr. Morrow? Were company funds used for affairs? Is your secretary involved in fraud? His voice cracked. No. Lies. All of it lies. But denial was useless. The documents had already spread. Phones in every hand displayed receipts with his signature, transfers with his initials, invoices tied to his name. Screens glowed with the evidence he thought he had hidden. I stood at the edge of the storm, my face calm, my body still. Julia gripped my arm. It's happening. He's burning. Evelyn moved beside me, her eyes never leaving the stage. Do not engage, she whispered. Let the silence speak. The silence did more than speak. It screamed. The very fact that I stood unshaken while Richard flailed told the crowd everything. One investor's wife turned to him, fury flashing in her eyes. You vouched for this man? She spat. Look at him now. The investor paled, his phone buzzing with alerts, his empire shaking by association. Richard's fiancée, or perhaps only his public companion, pulled off her diamond ring and hurled it into his chest. Gasps echoed as it clattered to the floor, rolling to rest in the champagne spill. She walked out without a backward glance, her heels slicing the silence. The crowd fractured. Some guests fled, desperate to avoid the scandal's stain. Others lingered, fascinated by the spectacle of a man undone. Reporters pressed closer, their questions now knives. Richard's face twisted with desperation. His eyes locked on me, blazing. "Elizabeth, tell them it's false." He shouted across the ballroom, his voice hoarse. "Tell them you made this up." But I said nothing. My lips stayed closed, my gaze steady. My silence condemned him louder than words ever could. The room turned against him fully then. Applause had become condemnation. Admiration had become mockery. The stage he had built to display his power had become his scaffold. Security moved in, guiding reporters back, ushering donors toward the exits. The music that had once filled the room had been cut off, leaving only the sound of raised voices and snapping shutters. Julia tugged at my arm. "Come on. We've done enough." We slipped through a side door into a service corridor, Evelyn guiding us with brisk precision. The air outside the ballroom was cooler, but the chaos still echoed behind us. When we reached the waiting car, photographers swarmed. "Elizabeth, did you leak the complaint? Elizabeth, did he confess to you? Elizabeth, is this your revenge?" I kept my chin high, my lips sealed. Evelyn's words repeated in my head. "Do not engage." Silence was the sharpest answer. The car door shut, muffling the storm. My body shook then, the adrenaline crashing over me. Julia pressed my hand. "You did it. You ended him." Evelyn leaned forward, her expression measured. "The filings, the spectacle, the witnesses, it's over for him. He'll spend the rest of his life fighting lawsuits. He cannot recover from tonight." I wanted to believe her, but my phone buzzed again inside my clutch. I pulled it out, my stomach tight. Another anonymous message lit the screen. "You think this is finished? It isn't. His enemies are now your enemies. Sleep carefully." My breath caught. The words felt heavier than any headline. Because they were right, Richard was finished, but the circle he had built, the people he had entangled, might not fall so easily. And I had just painted myself as the one who exposed it all. I looked out the window at the flashing lights of cameras behind us. Richard's world had collapsed. But the shadows outside his spotlight had just begun to stir. Because while Richard's empire was burning to ash, I realized I might now be the one standing in the fire's path. The morning after the gala, the world felt unrecognizable. I woke to silence in my apartment, but outside, the city roared with the noise of Richard's downfall. My phone vibrated constantly, notifications, news alerts, messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Julia sat at my kitchen table, already scrolling, her face lit by the glow of headlines. She read them aloud like a litany. Business mogul exposed in fraud scandal. Gala turns to chaos as court filings leak. Richard Moreau's affairs and lies unravel in real time. Every outlet carried the story. Every photo showed his face twisted in fury, his suit stained with champagne, his fiancée walking away with her hand bare. I sat across from Julia, clutching my coffee, the mug shaking in my hand. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. The image of him shouting my name beneath the chandeliers replayed over and over, his voice breaking as the crowd turned. "He's finished," Julia said firmly, setting her phone down. "His company's stock dropped 30% overnight. 3 board members resigned this morning. He's radioactive." Evelyn arrived shortly after, carrying a stack of newspapers. She spread them across the table. Front pages splashed with his disgrace. "The filings are validated. The evidence is circulating. By next week, the courts will freeze more of his accounts. He'll be drowning in litigation." Her tone was calm, precise. She spoke as if the war had been won. But I could not shake the unease growing in my chest. Because my phone buzzed again. A blocked number. A new message. "You tore him down. But you exposed us all. Do you think you're safe?" I turned the screen toward Evelyn. She read it without flinching. "This is not him. He is too busy fighting for scraps to send threats. This is someone else, likely tied to the money we traced. Someone who doesn't want more light shined where we pointed the beam." Her words chilled me. Richard's affairs, his arrogance, his fraud, that was bad enough. But the documents had shown other names, other transfers. What if we had dragged more powerful people into the light? People who would not crumble as easily as Richard? The day blurred with updates. By afternoon, Richard's company announced an emergency restructuring. By evening, photos of him leaving his penthouse alone, hunched and pale, flooded social media. Commentators who once praised him now ridiculed him. Memes of the diamond ring hitting the champagne glass spread faster than the news itself. And still my phone buzzed. The storm you started isn't finished. Richard was only the first branch. The roots are deeper. Watch yourself, Elizabeth. Each message coiled tighter around my nerves. Julia urged me to ignore them, but Evelyn was more cautious. Do not dismiss these. If others were involved, they may want to scare you. But fear is their weapon. Documentation is ours. Keep everything safe. Keep everything duplicated. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The city outside pulsed with light, sirens in the distance, horns echoing off glass towers. Richard was ruined. His pride was gone. His empire ash. But instead of peace I felt a strange dread. As if by pulling back the curtain on him, I had revealed a stage much larger, with players I had not yet seen. Because while Richard fought for survival in the wreckage of his life, I realized my own battle was only beginning. The spotlight had shifted, and now it was searching for me. Weeks passed, and the storm Richard once commanded had consumed him. He no longer appeared on magazine covers. His name was no longer spoken in admiration. Instead, it lived on the front pages as a warning. Fraud, betrayal, disgrace. His company fractured, investors scattered. His board dissolved piece by piece. His penthouse was sold under pressure. His accounts frozen. His circle reduced to nothing. I watched it all unfold from a distance, not with glee but with a strange calm. For years I had been the woman who stayed silent, who excused, who carried his burdens without question. Now silence had become my weapon. I said nothing at the gala, and that silence echoed louder than any accusation. Richard had given me his truth and arrogance. I slept with my secretary, and I don't regret it. He thought those words would crush me. Instead, they became the spark of his downfall. But even as he burned, the messages didn't stop. You think this is over? He wasn't the only one. The spotlight will turn. First, they terrified me. I locked my doors, checked behind me on every street, jolted awake at night. But eventually, fear hardened into vigilance. Because what I learned through Richard's betrayal is this. Power often hides behind lies, and lies are fragile when someone is willing to open her eyes. I began documenting more carefully, not just his trail but the names linked to his shell companies, the suspicious transfers, the partners who profited from his arrogance. I didn't seek them out, not yet. But I held their shadows in my binders, waiting. Julia asked me one night, "Do you ever regret it? Blowing it all open?" I thought of the woman I had been, sitting at that dinner table, fork trembling in my hand, listening to my husband confess betrayal with a smirk. I thought of the silence I carried for years, and the way it hollowed me out piece by piece. I looked at Julia and shook my head. No, I regret every year I believed him, but I don't regret opening my eyes. Evelyn reminded me often. Revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it means reclaiming yourself. Taking back your name. Refusing to live inside someone else's lie. Richard lost everything. But what I gained was something he could never take back, clarity. I am no longer the woman who swallows humiliation. I am no longer the wife who nods at excuses. My silence is no longer weakness. It is strength wielded with precision. My name is Elizabeth. My husband thought betrayal would break me. He thought pride would protect him. He thought wives always bend, always endure. He was wrong. I turned his own arrogance into the rope that dragged him down. I stood silent while the world watched his mask fall. And I will never again close my eyes to lies dressed as love. So if you are listening now, remember this. Betrayal is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of clarity. Collect your proof. Gather your allies. Be patient. And when the time comes, let the truth speak louder than your pain. Dignity cannot be stolen. It can only be surrendered. Never surrender yours.